Okay, good afternoon, everyone. The time now is 5 o'clock, so we're going to start with our program. My name is Savannah Purcell. I am the Director of External Boards and Executive Assistant to the Deputy Brooklyn Borough President. On behalf of Borough President Eric Adams and the Deputy Borough President Chaplain Ingrid Lewis Martin, we'd like to once again congratulate all the reappointed members and all the new members to our community boards, all 18. Um, Once again, we're joined with a number of our colleagues across government and from the Borough President's office to swear you guys in this evening, but to also provide you a brief orientation and workshop so you guys are equipped with all the tools that you need to be effective board members as we go into the 2022-2023 community board terms. Before we begin our program, I'd like to acknowledge that we're joined here tonight with technical support by Director of Technology, David Perez. I will also join by Tanya Cantlow, Counsel to the Borough President, who'll be swearing you in this evening. We're also joined by Richard Barrett, Director of Land Use for the Borough President. I'm also joined by Special Assistant to Deputy Borough President, Michelle Crutchfield. And from our colleagues across government, we're joined by Edward Sina, Brooklyn Board Director from Community Affairs, Rob Cashmere, Senior Engagement Specialist from the New York City Conflict of Interest Board. We're also joined by Winston Von Engel, as well as Quick Pollock from the Department of City Planning. We'd like to thank all our presenters for joining us here this evening to make sure that we get our members well equipped for the current community board term. Just a couple of reminders as new members and some questions that you may have as a new member of the board. Please note that a formal notice was sent out to members notifying them of their appointment. Some members are appointed for 2-year terms. So as 2-year terms, please pay attention to your appointment. And if you want to be reappointed to the board later on down the road, we want to remind all members that you are responsible for submitting your reappointment applications. If you're a midterm appointee, you'll have 1 year on the board and you'll be required to submit a reappointment next year to be qualified for a full 2-year term. If you're unsure or have questions in regards to your term, you're more than welcome to reach out to our office and connect with one of our liaisons who are assigned to represent each of our 18 boards. Some helpful resources along the way. Just note that all resources are located on the Borough President's website, which is located at brooklyn.usa.org. On there, you can find the contact information to all 18 community board offices, as well as email address to your liaison that represents the board. If you have any questions following this presentation, we do require that you reach out to your assigned liaison. We also ask that you reach out to your community board directly if you have not received communications from them regarding your appointment. So with that being said, and the time now being 5:03, I am going to turn over to Tanya Cantlow, Counsel to the Board President, so she can swear you in as newly appointed members to your respective community boards from 1 to 18. Thank you.
Thank you, Savannah. Can you hear me? You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good. Good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Tanya Cantlow, and I am the Counsel to the Borough President. Again, congratulations on your community board appointment. Being a community board member is very exciting. It will sometimes be challenging, but it is always rewarding. So your presence tonight is a testament to your commitment to your service to the community board. So let's get started. Now I will administer the oath. Please raise your right hand for the oath of office. Now please repeat after me. I, and state your name, do hereby affirm that I will observe and defend the Constitution of the United States the Constitution of the State of New York, the Charter of the City of New York, and the bylaws of my community board, and will perform all duties as a member of my community board to the best of my ability. Congratulations again and best wishes. I'll turn it back over to you, Sarana. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. So once again, congratulations. You all have been sworn in as members of your respective community boards. Please note that the workshop is open to members who are terms are not up, but it's open to all community board members because we want to make sure that everyone get the resources from the workshop and the orientations. So on behalf of the Brooklyn Board President, office, and our entire team, we welcome you to the community board family. We hope you guys have a productive and a wonderful experience while serving on your respective boards. Congratulations again. With that being said, we're going to move on to our workshop portion of our program. Join us this evening to speak about community board basics from the Brooklyn Borough Director from Community Affairs from the Office of the Mayor. Please welcome Edward C. Cherna.
Cerna.
Cherna.
Cerna. No worries, no worries. Thank you very much, everyone, and the Borough President's Office for inviting me. My name is Edward Cerna, Brooklyn Borough Director for the Office of the Mayor. I want to congratulate you all as well for your appointments. The community board is one of the most local forms of government, and your service and all the work that you do on your boards will be critical in bringing us back from the pandemic, not only to where we were about a year ago, but better. Right, the city is reopening up, and your input on a lot of decisions and policies that are coming down are going to be helpful in grounding some of that work. And making sure that those changes and what's coming down the pipeline works for your community. To share a little bit about my background, I was once in your shoes as well. I'm a former board member of Community Board 7, which covers Sunset Park and Windsor Terrace. While on the board, I served as the chair of the Immigration Committee, which is a committee that's actually very localized. If you go to various boards, you'll see that they'll have like transportation, education, but CB7 felt that having a committee dedicated just to immigration issues was imperative. And so when it was first created, some people thought that it was largely ceremonial. It actually turned out to be really critical, as we saw over the last couple of years, some of the directions that our country has been heading in. For instance, we passed resolutions condemning hate, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia. And now we see, again, even to today, some of that work still needs to be done. So as board members, you will be the leaders that will work with your colleagues to make sure that your voice is heard, that you're doing some of that same work, and bringing your perspective, and doing so in a manner that's respectful, because us Brooklynites, we're very opinionated and we know how to get our point across. Just have a conversation with anyone on the street about parking lanes or parking versus bike lanes, and you'll be there for quite a bit. So the mayor's office is here to support each and every one of you. In my role, I serve as the mayor's representative for boards 1, 2, 6, 7, 10, 11, 13, and 15. My area starts in Williamsburg and ends well into Sheepshead Bay. So for those of you who are assigned to those respective boards, you'll often see me at the monthly meetings providing updates from the administration, as well as you'll see me working with your district managers. For instance, during times of emergency, such as coastal storms or wind advisories, I will work hand in hand with our partner agencies and the district managers to elevate concerns such as like down power lines, down trees, etc. So again, our work gets informed by each and every one of you. So again, go to your committee meetings, participate fully, have your voice be heard and your input there, because if that's what you're there for, if you don't do it, then who will? So again, next time you have a question concerning city business, feel free to reach out to me. Right now, I don't have a counterpart, but just generally send questionnaires my way. My info is ecerna@cityhall.nyc.gov. You're going to have some subject matter experts following me and a long agenda, so I think I'll leave it at that. Congratulations once more for your appointment, and take care.
Wonderful. Thank you, Edward. And with that being said, we'll move on to our second workshop. This include the conflict of interest workshop. This will be conducted by Rob Cashmere, the Senior Engagement Specialist at the New York City Conflict of Interest Board. Rob, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. So let me go ahead and just share this here. Perfect. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see this okay. My name is Rob Casmer. I'm from the Conflicts of Interest Board. We are the ethics agency for the City of New York. If you are a new community board member, welcome. Congratulations. As mentioned from our previous panelist, what you do is very important, and the COIB's job is just to, as much as possible, remove any potential headaches or landmines out of your way so you can keep doing the good work that you do. Normally, this takes, as a community board member, you'll get an hour-long training every 2 years. We'll go over all the details. Today I got 10 minutes, so I'm going to go real quick, and I will give you contact info if you want to follow up on this stuff. But we'll jump right to it. Conflict of Interest Board, we manage conflicts of interest, right? Makes sense. Conflict is simply when a city employee's private, personal, or financial interest interferes or appears to interfere with the public interest. So if you want to think like Venn diagrams, all of you now serve in the public interest as community board members. So that's your public interest work here. Conflict of interest management is simply making sure that all of your private interests don't bleed over into the public work you're doing and the public authority you're granted. When I say private interest, I don't mean clandestine. I mean, you're on a community board. You're clearly involved with the community. So it's likely that you would have, as we see here, maybe outside financial interests, a second job, you run a business, you got family members looking for jobs, maybe you volunteer, maybe you're with a church, a charity, whatever, whether you got investments or you're involved in a campaign. These private interests are not prohibited. It is just our job to help you resolve the conflict when it crops up. We are the hotline people. Every community board person, it feels like, is calling us all the time, as they should. Again, we want you to be able to focus on your important work and not get tripped up on this stuff, as important as it is. So much of what we do is about being available at the moment you need help. We see Blake Griffin over here, a fellow 7-foot guy like myself, dunking, which I can no longer do because I'm 35. I used to coach youth basketball, right? But I work for the city. Is that a conflict? Well, yes, it kind of is. As it turns out, the league got grants from DYCD and all that sort of stuff. So I had a conflict of interest. My public interest work as a COIB ethicist came into contact with my outside private work as a basketball coach in only a very minor way, right? I had some overlap where I'm now working for a group that gets funding from the city and the city. That's a conflict. What happened? Did I get in trouble? No. I resolved the conflict, which is what the COIB is about. I disclosed, yes, I'm at a place that gets city money. No, I have nothing to do with any of that. I will disclose and recuse if they ever ask me anything about the city, and that's that. The COIB, as I said, here to sort of prevent ethical issues, not catch them necessarily. Again, there's got enough law enforcement agencies for that. We're an independent, non-mayoral agency, not executive branch. Because of that, we're able to uniquely offer advice, and you have confidentiality and anonymity when you do call. I have limited time, so I'll simply say if you're interested in doing some self-study, you want to see what sort of things are violations, who is violated, where. Of course, we have a training unit. We have all the periodicals. You can check that way. Enforcement, I will leave it with simply, unlike other jurisdictions where ethics boards act in an advisory capacity, this is New York. You've been living here for a while. You might have noticed, not a perfect city. There's some unethical stuff. There's some corrupt stuff. So everything from civil penalties, criminal penalties, administrative penalties, this thing is enforced. That's all I need to say. But the main thing for you as community board members is going to be, our advice line. COIB provides to community board members free, anonymous, confidential, top flight legal advice on any of this stuff. So you got a question about a vote, you got a question about, chairing a committee, someone wants to give you a gift, you want to know, can I include CB staff in a fantasy football pool? Whatever it might be, these are the sorts of questions that you can reach out to us either anonymously. Hey, I work at a community board. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I just want some information. Call this number and get sorted out. Or if you want everything in writing, we're very happy to do that. Get you the advice you need, signed, stamped, sealed by the city. So you have peace of mind. Put that in a folder. Show it to your nosy peer if they ever have any questions. I don't care what you do with it. We're just here to get you the advice you need. And again, because we're independent and non-mayoral, we don't work with any other agency. Once you communicate with us, I would have to commit a crime to communicate back to your community board or agency or anything like that. Confidentiality is a real priority, and that drives the nearly 7,000 calls we get, not just from community board members, but every single year. So again, the big takeaway here, file this number away, check out nyc.gov/ethics, and when the moment arises where you don't know what to do, take that risk-free moment and give us a call and we'll sort you out. So, speeding right along, recap, the conflict of interest is not the problem. Unresolved conflicts are the problem. Especially as a community board, you all have so many private interests, you never get anything done if it wasn't about resolving them. So a couple things to keep an eye out for. I won't be able to go into everything today, but these are sort of the big ticket things to keep in mind when you're serving the city. Number one, misuse of position. Public servants can't use their position to personally or financially benefit themselves, their family members, or any person or firm with whom they have a business or financial relationship. This is a three-part law. You can't take an official action. So this is, I'm not acting as me, I'm acting as a community board person. I'm using my public authority to obtain a benefit. That's part two. That could be cash, that could be special access, parking, whatever, for someone who's associated with me. So if this is a family member, someone I have any sort of financial tie to, I can never take official action that would accrue a benefit to them, right? So it's one of those things. So obviously, if a family member, they come before a committee or whatever, you're going to have to disclose that and recuse, because any decision you make is going to directly affect them. Misuse of position, rule number one for a reason. When we allow you to mantle the city and make official governmental decisions, as you do, we just want to make sure that the public knows that that's all you're using that power for. Corollary to that is the resources, city supplies, letterhead, telephone, email, computer, equipment, resources. I mean, if your community board has a vehicle, for example, only use that for community board reasons, right? Whatever it is you're given to do your community board work, use it during community board time, and that's it. Minimal personal incidental use. If you check your fantasy football while you're before the community board meeting gets started, or use the staff computer to print out a recipe. This doesn't concern the COIB. Minimal personal incidental use of city resources. Follow your supervisor's guidance. But I do have to state we have a zero tolerance policy on any of that financial or political use of resources. You like a particular candidate, you print out one flyer over at the community board, you have staff, print out a mailer, that's a problem. We have to keep a firm line in the sand between city resources being used for the board and city resources being used for any of those aforementioned private interests, financial or political. Gifts from the public, pretty straightforward. Don't take anything from the public. You're already, as a public servant, you're meant to be serving them. There's already some amount of compensation for you to do that. And so while your work is valuable and people might appreciate it, or frankly, more cynically, they may want to lobby you in little ways, you should in general not be taking gifts for your public service. Now we get to the fun part, voting. This is pretty straightforward despite the number of things on the screen. So let's say you do have some sort of conflict of interest. You have an interest in, a bar that's coming up for a liquor license, or parking directly in front of a business you own, something like that, where there is, as we can see, direct economic gain or mitigation of loss for oneself or one's associate. If you see yourself in that position, And by the way, if you're not sure you're there, give us a call. We get plenty of calls that way. But if you do have that interest, in terms of discussion, you can participate. Like you're there to represent the community. So you can say, hey, as we all know, this will affect my business. Now that I've disclosed that, I'm still going to take part in discussion, but we all know where I'm coming from, right? However, if you do have a conflict, maybe somewhat obviously, when the voting starts, you cannot vote on it. You've already got an interest, right? So you're able to be in there and influence things and use persuasion, that's fine. But when it comes time to vote, you have to sit back. The 3Ds is how I remember this. Basically, if you're like, this is a little close to me, you disclose the conflict, you discuss the issue, and then you do not vote on it. Disclose, discuss, and don't vote. If you want a fourth D, it's sort of a secret D in there, I would say directly. This only applies to matters that affects you directly. So if it's a beautification project or a park on the other side of the district, these things might indirectly benefit you by bringing more people to the neighborhood or making parking more accessible or whatever. But that does not rise to the level of a conflict. We need direct economic gain or mitigation of loss in order for you to need to go to these 3Ds. Again, disclose, discuss, don't vote. One thing to keep in mind, if you have a position of power or authority, you are chairing a committee. If you are a committee chair, same thing applies. You do the 3Ds, you disclose it, you discuss it, you don't vote. However, you can't chair that entire meeting about your interest, your conflict. Similarly, if you find yourself in a position where you're now 3 times having to recuse yourself from the committee that you chair, you're not going to be able to chair that again. I'm sorry, sir, or ma'am, you have too many conflicts. But you may, of course, serve on any committee. You have to be able to represent your community. You're on the board for a reason. The discussion is fine, serving is fine, but again, if you're in a position of authority, you have to take a step back. And finally, when it comes to our community board staffers, our unsung heroes out there doing the work every day, the rules are similar to what you might find in Chapter 68 for any public servant. You can't have any financial relationships with the staff, and that is everything. No loans, leases, susus, March Madness, lotto pool, Super Bowl pool, share a Netflix subscription, whatever you got going on, you have to be entirely financially independent from your staff. Also, political solicitation. We all have First Amendment rights. We all have First Amendment rights where we can back any candidate we want, be involved with any campaign we want. Free speech, right? However, solicitation of staff is prohibited. So, if someone comes in around the water cooler, it's like, oh, you see a debate last night? That's not a problem. If, however, someone in a position of authority is saying, hey, you're a staffer, are you voting for Trump? Did you donate to Biden? There's a thing this Saturday for this candidate. You should come out to that. That sort of solicitation cannot be made. Right? That is sort of the COIB's effort to combat the political machine, as it were. Confidential information, pretty straightforward. You know this if you're exposed to any protected information in your role on a community board. Do not leak that. There are severe penalties for that sort of stuff. Everything we do, the whole reason we have the ethics code, like I said, is not to catch people slipping up. It's to show the citizens that we have really high standards in here and we take this stuff seriously. And frankly, you can trust us because nobody wants to be served by or interface with people they don't trust. And the city does a lot for their citizens. We want people to have a good feeling about it and believe that we're here to help. When people leak confidential information, it is devastating to that mission. So not for nothing, as expected, fairly severe penalties there. But I think I've gone over my 10 minutes and I don't want to take any more up. So I will just leave you with the most important part. Call us. This is not, in the private sector, there's hotlines for everything. There's hotlines on the side of Frosted Flakes. I don't know what you're calling it for, but it's there. This is one that is used every single day and frequently every single day. I would say I hope you never have to call, but frankly, you will have to call because if you have anything going on in your life, one day you'll see a little bit of tension between it and your public responsibilities. And I hope on that day, I'm there to help you out. But otherwise, Sarana, I think we're good. I'm sorry, do we have questions? Any
Well,
questions I could do real quick?
we'll see if we could get questions in afterwards. We didn't plan for Q&A, but just based on
Oh,
timing,
okay.
we'll see. Yeah.
In that case, I will just say, if you have questions, I'm talking to you right now. I think you missed today, but this is the number, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. We can talk to you one-on-one, and then you don't have to get your question answered in front of 100 or so people or whatever. That's probably the way to do it, right?
Wonderful. All right.
All right.
So Rob, thank you for that wonderful presentation. Once again, please make use of that resource and that contact information. And if you have any concerns, please feel free to reach out to the Conflict of Interest Board. They're there to guide you and navigate you and get you the answers that you need. Before we move on in our program, I'd like to acknowledge 2 of our liaisons who represent some of the community boards here who's on the line. We have Ms. Nan Blackshear, who is the community board liaison for the borough president for community board number 2. And we have Marcus Harris, who is our community board liaison for community board number 4. So thank you for joining us this evening. We'll now move on to our next presentation. This is Budget Basics in a City Planning Workshop. And we're glad to be joined by a professional who's been doing this a long time. We're very familiar with him here. So we're joined by Winston Von Engel. He's the director of the booking office for the Department of City Planning, as well as his colleague Chris Pollock, who is a planning coordination for city planning. So they're going to discuss the role that city planning relates to community boards. So Winston, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sarana, for that introduction. I appreciate it. And I've always enjoyed working with the Borough President's Office. Chris is going to share his screen and presentation with you all. And while he does that, I just want to say thank you. I'm impressed by the Conflict of Interest Board and their graphics, and we have something to learn. And I'm glad I just completed my full disclosure form with conflicts of interest. I'm happy to report that. Okay, so who are we at the Department of City Planning? Next slide, please, Chris. So broadly speaking, at the Department of City Planning, we plan for the future of the people of New York City. As the name implies, we're not in charge of streets, we're not in charge of sewers, but we know something about everything that happens in the city. The next slide, please. There are a number of strategic objectives here. You can see them, you can read them yourself. Neighborhood improvement, housing, economic development, resiliency and sustainability, which is really important, particularly to the many people who in Brooklyn live in lower lying areas. You know all who were affected by Superstorm Sandy. Resiliency is a real concern in Brooklyn. We have also land use review, which is a very boring technical term for the actually very sometimes contentious way that changes in how land is to be used within a community is reviewed, is voted on, right? That's what land use review is about. And then data and expertise, which also sounds or can sound very boring, but is actually fascinating. It tells you a story about where our city is going, where it came from, things about our city. And actually, Chris works in our strategic planning division and planning coordination division and uses data, for example, to identify and assist community boards in responding to, for example, budget requests. And that's something that he's going to get into in just a moment. Next slide. Very important to differentiate that the Department of City Planning and the City Planning Commission are two separate things, two separate entities. We are related, but we are different. So the Department of City Planning is an agency of the city. We belong under the direction of the mayor. We follow the direction of the mayor and the citizens who elect the mayor. We're responsible for planning for orderly growth and development of the city. That's actually what the charter says, the city charter says. And we administer the city's land use review process, which is the uniform land use review procedures. These are the famous or infamous rezonings and sale or acquisition of land by the city and mapping of streets. We're about 300 terrific employees, people who are dedicated to serving our city, our communities, who are proud to be there. And I'm every day I'm proud to work with people like Chris in our agency. The City Planning Commission is a separate body of 13 appointed commissioners, 7 by the mayor, so majority by the mayor, 5 by the borough presidents, including Borough President Adams, has 1 representative, and 1 representative by the from the public advocate. And the City Planning Commission actually votes on changes that are brought before it as part of the land use review process that you are also going to be part of. What unites us with or relates us to the commission is that our director, the head of our agency, is also the chair of the Planning Commission. So there is a relationship at the top with the director being able to provide information to the commission from the department. And we present to the commission applications that are before them, and we provide them with information. Next slide. And so these are, broadly speaking, some of the divisions within our agencies. The ones that you, as community board members, are going to interact with the most are going to be the first one, the borough offices. So we have our main office in Lower Manhattan, but every single borough has a so-called borough office. And ours is in downtown Brooklyn at 16 Court Street, right across the street from Borough Hall. Sometimes I try and peek into Richard Barrick's window at Borough Hall. And you can see below the list, and for some inexplicable reason, Brooklyn is not listed first. There's some other borough there, but there are obviously, that's a joke, there are obviously 5 borough offices. There's also strategic planning. This is where Chris works, and he's going to tell you, Chris works in planning support, my apologies, and technical planning, planning support. But all of these divisions do really incredible work on looking at how our city functions and how to improve it. And this point, right? So the way you interact with us at the Department of City Planning is typically through, you may have heard some of our neighborhood studies or rezonings or other plans. These are long-term planning efforts. We've done work in communities throughout Brooklyn. We've touched every single community district over the past many years. The other way that you interact with us on a routine basis is through this thing called the Uniform Land Use Review Process, which is the way in the charter sets out and how the public reviews changes in land use. So rezonings, changes in the city map, whether the city should buy a piece of property or sell a piece of property, for example, whether somebody should be allowed to build a little higher or wider or have a different use on a particular land. That is land use, and that goes through a process that includes the community board, the borough president, then the City Planning Commission and the City Council. That's something you'll interact with all the time. And then the other way that you influence the city's budgeting process, which is also part of planning, is through the Statement of Community District Needs and Community Board Budget Requests. And that is something that Chris is going to tell you about next.
Great. Thanks so much, Winston, and thank you to the Borough President's Office for having us here today. And congratulations to all of the new members. We're excited to work with you all. And personally, my team oversees the submissions of the Statement of Community District Needs and Community Board Budget Requests. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what that looks like in practice and how you might interact with this. So just to level set a bit, I'm first going to ground us in the city's budget. So for those of you who aren't as familiar with this, there are a few different milestones in the annual budget cycle, and we are currently in fiscal year, we're on our way to fiscal year 22, so we can see here that what the submissions we receive from community boards by you through the Statement of Needs and budget requests directly inform the next steps of the budget. So right now, the executive budget was published in April, and soon, by the end of the summer, we'll have the adopted budget completed, which will then lead us into the beginning of the next fiscal year. So the community board input you all provide is really the first step in this process. So what this really looks like is that there are two charter mandates. On the left, we have the Statement of Community District Needs, and on the right, the community board budget request process. And this is now really just one single process, and we work very closely with OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, to facilitate this. So on the left, the Statement of Needs is more about the qualitative needs of your district, and it's derived from your unique perspective and knowledge of your neighborhood. And it provides some of the additional context for your specific budget requests. On the right here, we have some details about the community board budget requests, which are really specific expense and capital requests that are submitted to specific city agencies. So these become a little bit more detailed and are developed through information you gather through your interactions with city agencies, from your own board members, and through public input. These are also prioritized and numbered, and you submit around 40 capital and 25 expense per guidance that is provided by OMB. So when we look at this at a citywide level, one thing we ask boards for is to identify the top 3 pressing issues that are facing their district. And when we look at this at a citywide level, we can see a pretty significant variety in the issues that are identified by different boards and across different boroughs. Citywide, affordable housing, schools, and land use trends were the most pressing issues identified by boards, but we see a pretty significant spread across many other issues, including infrastructure resiliency, street conditions, and senior services. And this is a view that we provide to other stakeholders, including leadership at city agencies, to provide them with an overview of what is happening across the city and what different boards are identifying as their top issues. On the next slide, I just wanted to provide a little bit more of a concrete example of what this looks like. So here I've highlighted in particular one of the top 3 pressing issues identified by Brooklyn Community Board 17. And this board identified economic development and recovery as one of their top issues last year. So here I've included the explanation that the board provided, which discusses the Open Streets program and the importance of that particular program during the height of the pandemic. One thing I'll mention too is that while your district managers take the lead on providing this information to us and submit this information, there are many opportunities for committee members, community board members, and the public to be involved in the drafting of these so that the input that we include in these is broad and including a lot of different perspectives. On the next slide here, we're talked about these 2 separate processes that are now together in one single process. So here is an example of what a community board budget request looks like. This one in particular was submitted by Brooklyn Community Board 13 and is about a bikeway in that part of the district. And so you can see some of the few different pieces of information that are provided, including the request. So in this case, this is a request for park building or access improvements, specifically to the Department of Parks and Recreation. And the board also provided a specific location along with supporters that were identified as supporting the project. one thing about the budget request is that agencies are required to respond to every request that's submitted. So here's an example of an agency response for that same budget request. In this case, I've highlighted there are two pieces that are required from the agency. You'll receive a response category, which is a broad answer. In this case, this request has been funded, and then the agency will provide more specific details. In this case, the agency recommended that the board reach out to DPR for specifics on the request. They also provided these additional comments, and these are provided in a more detailed register of budget requests that is provided to your board after these are received from agencies. You can find the full list of budget requests online on OMB's publications page, and we've included a link to that website here. So finally, as Winston mentioned, we have a lot of data and expertise that we share as an agency, and we have several different online resources that can help inform your work, not only the statement of community district needs, but also other types of work that you might be doing as board members. So here I've highlighted only a few of the many tools we have available, including our community district profiles, which many of you may have used before. You can actually find your previous board statement of needs on this website. We have the past 10 years of reports available if you're interested in seeing what kinds of issues your board has discussed in the past. We also have other tools, including the Facilities Explorer, where you can find information about public and private facilities. We have the Zoning and Land Use Application, or ZOLA, along with NYC Population Fact Finder, where if you're really interested in digging into data within your neighborhood, you can use this tool to find really specific socioeconomic data for a user-defined area, which is a really great tool for those of you who really want to dig in a bit more. If you have any questions about this, whether they're related to the statement of needs or just more broadly anything that we've covered, you can always email my team at cdneeds_dl@planning.nyc.gov. Also, you can contact your Brooklyn office planning liaison, and they're also a great resource for any questions you might have about land use questions or anything that might be related to the ULURP process. And with that, I'll turn it back to Serrano.
Okay, thank you for that, Chris and Winston, for that presentation. It was a great presentation. Before we move on, I'd like to acknowledge another one of our liaisons who's on the line, Candace Julian, who is the liaison for Community Board 3, has joined us. We're going to move on to our second to last presentation for this evening. This is an overview of the city charter. From time to time, when the community board have meetings, questions come up about quorum or votes or bylaws, and you may graciously reach out to a liaison, reach out to myself, and then we'll graciously refer you to the wonderful Tanya Cantlow, counsel to the board president, who's able to guide you through those questions. So I'm going to turn over the floor back to Tanya, where she's going to do a brief presentation on the city charter overview. Thank you.
Thank you again. I'm just waiting for David to the presentation. Okay. So again, tonight we're going to focus on 5 areas. The presentation is about 18 pages, but I'm not going to go through 18 pages. A lot of this information is in the city charter, which we will provide you with the section of the charter so that you can read this information. Are the community board's role, the borough president's role, the borough board's role, the borough service cabinet's role, and also we're just going to talk about basic community board rights and responsibilities. So although we're primarily going to be focusing on the New York City Charter, as it pertains to community boards are also governed by the New York State Open Meetings Law, the New York State Public Officers Law, as well as...
1 second. It seems that we lost Tanya. at the moment. Just give her a moment. Tanya, we lost you for a moment. We lost you for a moment. So I'm just going to ask you, we missed
Oh,
kind of
really?
yeah.
Ah,
Yeah,
I'm
so
not
we
sure
lost
where.
not a problem. I think you could just start back from the community board and city government. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So basically, New York City Charter primarily focus, as it pertains to community boards, is governed by the New York City Charter, but you should also be familiar with the New York State Open Meetings Law, the New York State Public Officers Law, as well as your community board bylaws and Robert's Rules of Order. So I'm just going to talk about first, before we get into the roles, what the purpose of community boards. So community boards are to encourage and facilitate the participation of citizens within city government, within their communities, and the efficient and effective organization of agencies that deliver municipal services in local communities and boroughs. So community boards and city government. So there you would look at section 2800, chapter 70 of the city charter will provide to you. And community boards are city agencies with a specific authority. Community boards are also partners in city government, as well as community boards function in an advisory capacity to ensure the needs of the community are met. Next slide. So let's talk about the borough president's role, and that will be found in section 81 of the New York City Charter, chapter 4. So just in summary, the borough president, he appoints community board members. Half of those members actually can be nominated by your council member, which covers who covers that district. The borough president makes recommendations for ULURP, and the borough president chairs the borough service cabinet meetings and borough board. Also, the borough president provides technical support, which Sarana mentioned, to community boards and offers training and members and staff as needed. So I just want to spend a little bit of time there, emphasizing that the borough president only provides technical support. We are not the lawyers for the community board. So if there's a legal issue, we always suggest that you contact the law department. I can give you that information, but they are the lawyers for the borough president's office as well as the community board. We are only there to provide technical support. Next slide. So let's talk about Borough Board. Borough Board is made up of council members who may vote only on matters directly affecting the district, as well as community board chairs. The Borough Board mediates disputes between community boards, and the Borough Board monitors progress of city-funded capital projects and the quality of city services delivered in the borough. Next slide. Borough Service Cabinet meetings. No, go back. Okay. Borough Service Cabinet meetings actually made up of the borough president, district managers for each community board, and borough representatives of each city agency. So according to the charter, district managers are not included, but our office has taken an expanded view of the interpretation of the charter to include district managers to the Borough Service Cabinet meetings. Those meetings are held monthly. The meetings do not occur in the months of July and August. The Borough Service Cabinet meetings Borough Service Cabinet actually consults with the community board to ensure service delivery and to make sure that it's efficient and effective. Next slide. So I'm just going to go over a few basics or the rights and responsibilities of community board members. Each community board has up to 50 members, and they are appointed by the borough president for a term of 2 years. Now, this is very important, which commenced April 1st, 2019. To be a board member, actually now there are term limits. So there is a maximum of 4 consecutive 2-year terms. However, if you were appointed beginning April 1st, 2020, the borough president may appoint members for up to 5 consecutive terms commencing on that date. You need to be a resident of New York City or have a significant interest in the district in which you are a member. You also must be at least 16 years old to be a board member. Next slide. As a board member, you should participate on committees. Now, each community board has their own sets of bylaws, which you will see different committees. One particular community board may have a seniors committee, a youth committee, but if you look at another community board, you will see police, sanitation, and small business. So all community boards do not have the same committees. And the city charter allows non-community board members to serve on the community board committees, but at all times, a community board member must chair a committee. So you can always have members of the community that are serving on the committees, but they cannot chair. Let's go into removal and vacancies. Again, members may be removed for cause by the borough president or a majority vote of the board in accordance with due process. And the borough president can fill vacancies for the remainder of the unexpired term in the same way that appointments are made. Next slide. So just at a high level, again, section 2800, the board members, you're responsible for the welfare of the district. You communicate with the people of the district. Next slide. You participate in the budget process and the capital program. You conduct public hearings and submit recommendations and priorities to the mayor, city council, and city planning commission. Next slide. You also plan for the needs of the district, and you've heard that from our previous presenters. Next slide. And you monitor and evaluate the delivery of services, right? So you assist agencies in the preparation of service statements of agency objectives. You evaluate the quality and quantity of services, as well as disseminate information about city services and programs. Next slide. So now let's talk about conducting community board business. You should elect your own officers. You must render an annual report to the mayor, city council, and the borough board. Request the attendance of agency representatives at meetings, and you should keep an active record of your activities and transactions, including minutes of your meetings. Next slide. So this is very important. Again, community board actions are governed by the city charter, the open meetings law, public offices law, your bylaws, as well as Robert's Rules of Order. So in order to conduct business or have a meeting, you must have a quorum. And the definition of the quorum is the majority of the appointed members of any community board, and public members and ex officio members do not count towards your quorum. So if you are at a meeting and you do not have a quorum, you should not continue with your meeting. You should fix the time to adjourn your meeting, but you should not be continuing with your community board meeting without a quorum. At your community board meetings, you should be voting. Again, you need a majority of your affirmative votes. You could either be voting yes, you could vote no, or you can abstain. So there's no law, unless it's actually required by law, that no action by the board can require more than a majority vote. It's always a majority vote. And all of your votes should be by an open ballot, signed paper ballots, a roll call vote, to ensure that the member's vote is recorded and it can be made public. And this, again, is to comply with the open meetings law. And the chair has the same voting rights as all other members. Next slide. Continuing on with community board meetings, according to the charter, the community board, again, should be meeting every month, at least once a month, except in the months of July and August. Community board should be having at least one hearing a month. And it requires that every public meeting of the board, you should set aside a time to hear from the public. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the open meetings law. Community board meetings are required to be open to the public. So we know with that there's always an exception. So those four bullets there are a few exceptions of when a community board may go into an executive session. And some of those examples to go into an executive session would be matters that will be imperil to the public safety if disclosed, any matter that may disclose the identity of a law enforcement agency, discussions regarding proposed pending or future litigation, or medical, financial, credit, or employment history of an individual, or matters leading to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of an individual. So after the board has completed its discussion in an executive session, you would need a motion to return to the open session to complete the remainder of the meeting. Next slide. So because of the pandemic, the governor in March of 2020, he issued an executive order under the open meetings law. All of the public meetings should be in person, but he has suspended meeting in person because of the pandemic. So right now, community board meetings are not required to meet in person. And that is for your hearings as well as your community board meetings. So some things that must be in place during the executive order, in order for the community board to have these meetings, the community must be able to hear what's going on in the meeting, must be able to ask questions. So there has to be a opportunity for the community to be engaged in what's happening at the meeting. Right now, the executive order has been extended until June 24th, 2021, where community boards are not expected to meet in person. Next slide. I think that might be it. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Tanya.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so we're going to get ready for our last presentation for this evening, and that's a land use workshop. Richard, let me make sure Richard is here. Richard?
I am here.
Wonderful. So we have Richard Barrick, Director of Land Use for the Office of the Borough President. He's going to do a quick overview in regards to land use workshop. So Richard, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
So as Winston pointed out earlier, you as community board members, the boards, you have an advisory role and you're the first step in our process. So the idea would be you're receiving information from presentations of the proposal, typically the applicant. You would be conducting public hearings and holding committee meetings, and the committee that's assigned to it would make a recommendation to the full board, and then the full board has the opportunity to vote on the committee motion, and at times they'll support it, at times they may not. But the key thing is defeating a motion is not a motion in itself. So the goal really in the end is to put another motion, because you'd like to have a motion out there, because a motion informs the process that as we move forward. So things that you review in the land use world are not always in the world that I work in and that Winston works in. You'll have applications that pertain in some community boards to the Landmarks Preservation Commission. It could be an individual building, and it could also be establishing or enlarging a historic district. So we have many of those throughout parts of Brooklyn, but not all boards have equal conditions with that regard. Another action that we become aware of at Borough Halls, city planning becomes aware to a certain degree, is actions of the Board of Standards and Appeals. And so they have actions that could be based on hardship, which are called variances. And they could have actions that are what's called a special permit, which sometimes I'd like to say more complicated items tend to go before the City Planning Commission. Items not as involved, typically those are the type assigned to the Board of Standards and Appeals. So reasons for a variance may be you want to have an office building, but you're in a residential district and you want to make a case why a residential building doesn't work. Typically, it's the other way around. We've had patterns in the past where industrial properties, people want to do residential. I got an application like that today. And other times maybe you have a narrow lot and you can't fit the yard and have a building wide enough to have a practical building. So that's another example of bulk changes. And there's 5 findings that the Board of Standards looks at. So the committee and the board is not going to be deemed experts in all aspects that the Board of Standards and Appeals needs to be in. You're not going to likely have people on your committee that are going to be able to evaluate economic hardship, which is something nonprofits don't have to show. So in terms of like reasonable return on investment aspects, but the board, one of the most important things you can do is comment on how a request might affect the immediate block, the immediate neighbors, the larger character of the area, because you live in the area, you see the area. So that's where you do bring your expertise. An example of a special permit that would go to the Board of Standards and Appeals might be having a school in an industrial area. In a few boards, 15 in particular, but also parts of 14 and 11, we have small home expansions that happen through the Board of Standards and Appeals. So again, whether it's a variance, whether it's a special permit, I think the aspect of character of the neighborhood is the one finding that I think is the most important one for community boards to focus on, because you do experience your neighborhood on a daily basis. So we'll talk more about items with the City Planning Commission, and they can happen from both public sector items and private sector items. So rezonings are the most common one. We have most likely rezonings are about promoting development, but we do have cases where rezonings are more about or include aspects of preserving neighborhood character and quality of life. But often the zonings we're looking at promoting areas where density is appropriate as a means. And in this administration, we've added a tool that combines that with including affordable housing. MIH is the jargon for that. So we've had a recent rezoning under de Blasio administration. We had the East New York Community Plan, which affected parts of Ocean Hill, Cypress Hills, and predominantly the northern section of East New York. And that did have a little blend. Primarily, it was about creating housing opportunity, but there were some areas that were a little bit more preservation-based or neutral-based in terms of type of zoning. We also have a big proposal in Gowanus right now that's before Community Board 6, and soon to move on to the Borough President. Then other aspects, we have special permits are also in city planning's purview, so there may be applications to modify the bulk where the standard zoning envelope may or may not be the best outcome. We have waterfront regulations. Certain cases we've had retail stores in industrial areas to be allowed larger than 10,000 square feet. Those are the more common ones we've had, but even arenas require special permits. Disposition of city-owned property. Most often it's to promote affordable housing development, but it's also used to promote economic development. Text changes, we have some in the process right now. We've had it done for encouraging supermarket development, and we're looking to modify that text right now. There was a recent presentation to the Brooklyn Borough Board. So some community boards may have weighed in already, but many boards, this is still available for them to weigh in. Health and fitness is another one. Health clubs typically require special permits to the Board of Standards and Appeals, makes it a very slow, time-consuming costly process. So that's being considered to make it as of right. So again, that's before the community boards right now as well. Limiting building heights when community facilities have been considered, that has also been involved in certain text changes. We've had big applications changing a lot of the text. Zoning for quality and affordable and mandatory inclusionary housing were both established early on in the de Blasio administration, primarily in terms of producing better buildings and providing more affordable housing opportunities. We do have a hotel text amendments. Many boards have weighed in already. City Planning Commission will be looking at that in July for a public hearing. An earlier version to not have hotels as right in manufacturing zones did go through last couple of years. Self-storage also was made to be not as right in certain industrial areas. And both the initial with hotels and self-storage industrials had more to do with retaining land in manufacturing district for blue collar jobs. So then coastal flooding resiliency zoning text, I'm not sure if it fully went through the process yet, but that went through the community board and the borough president and was advancing through the community board. It's another example of a recent text change to promote resiliency with development in areas that may or may not be very coastal, because flat-lying areas of southern Brooklyn in particular had effect of Sandy-related flooding. So the extent of properties that will be governed by the coastal area actually could be several blocks away from the waterfront. And we're waiting on a proposal from city planning related to something you saw in the pandemic, where restaurants, for example, were within sidewalks and street right-of-ways in a more simplified process. So we're looking for a text change soon regarding that as well. And in it, the theme of open space usage. So when community boards get these items assigned to them, they could approve them or disapprove them. And they could also do either with conditions, because even if you feel like you need to be against something, conditions help at least explain the thought process better than a straight no may do. So then I'd like to talk more about what the borough president has done in his 7.5 years in terms of ideas that boards can consider in terms of their recommendations. So we've certainly been largely supportive of rezonings that have been furthering affordable housing through the mandatory inclusionary housing designation. There's a few different options. The more deeply affordable option, the less amount of affordable floor area compared to more highly allowed rents. Borough president has pushed the idea of affordable forever. So the mandatory inclusionary housing units are affordable forever. But when the city disposes of affordable housing developments, property for affordable housing, it's not necessarily affordable forever. It's usually based on financing terms. So we've also pushed for accommodating a greater family mix of the housing type, although there are times we feel small units are important because they accommodate the elderly and supportive housing units. Then also in terms of issues where making the affordable housing work with more people, we've advocated for the concept of allowing households that are rent burdened to reduce their rent through the ability of the affordable housing, even if they're still going to be rent burdened, because we'd like to keep more money in their pockets. So other concepts we've had, lotteries with a lottery effects, like to date, it's been a 50% local preference. There are times when properties are literally at the community's edge. Maybe people don't know a board boundary. So should other districts be allowed for preference when homeless families have kids in schools near these sites? We've wanted those households, because a certain amount of homeless are working poor. They actually can qualify for lottery if we give them preference. We think that's important. And then we've made recommendations that go well beyond the ULURP applications we've had. For example, we reviewed a rezoning on Broadway in Ocean Hill, and the borough president called for increasing density along Broadway for a significant length from the junction, Broadway Junction, to actually Williamsburg Plaza, where there's a bus terminal there. We've also called for extending density along the 3 train from where it comes above ground, Lincoln Terrace Park, along 98th Street and Livonia Corridor, going into boards 5 and 16, as an example. Broadway Junction, we've actually called for studies. There has been work with EDC, city planning, to help stimulate thinking about what can be done Broadway Junction that maybe creates more opportunity for office development, perhaps government offices, destination retail, and community support uses. And that's still something that could be considered moving on. Then in terms of the Williamsburg waterfront, we've had some proposals where we've supported standards that, while allowing office development, actually do include dedicating space to keep industrial uses an opportunity so they can remain in the area. We've pushed heavily for urban agriculture. So we've mentioned some zoning text ideas that we think could help free that up. And we've also, with disposition of city-owned properties, not disposition, but renting of city-owned properties, we've actually called for urban agriculture on the roof of buildings the city may use for warehouses or other purposes. For jobs, we've pushed for permanent jobs, or even if it's construction jobs, to be locally based, advancing opportunities for veterans, minority women business enterprises, locally based enterprises, because the idea is locally based jobs. If we're having development in Brooklyn, we'd like to see Brooklynites to the greatest extent benefiting from working. We've also pushed for incorporating supermarkets in certain developments, or if a supermarket would be at risk by a development, to make sure it returns. We've looked at sites in the areas where we can have more school sites where we think that school districts are crowded. We've advocated for cultural uses, including around the BAM Cultural District. We've looked for childcare centers when there's been leases to encourage longest leases possible. And we've also looked for, if properties can be sold, for an opportunity for the city to buy the properties to make sure we are able to retain necessary childcare. For sustainable and resilient future, we've advocated for things like passive house construction, rooftop solar panels, even solar facades on building, newer technology for that, green roofs, blue roofs. If budgets compromise, even white roofs, taller buildings, wind turbines, rooftop microgrid battery placements where appropriate. And in the public realm, street tree plantings and sidewalk rain gardens, which is a DEP initiative to slow water down so it doesn't get to our treatment plants too quickly from rainstorms. For advancing pedestrian safety, we've had this initiative called Cross Brooklyn, where the idea is to pop out sidewalks into intersections to shorten the crosswalks for those who may be elderly, children. So for public safety from that respect. For retail projects, we've at times called for traffic mitigation for post openings, like a year later when we know the established patterns of traffic, to look at what the traffic would be like. So these are a range of ideas that community boards could include into their motions. For land use, particularly like zoning recommendations, they need to be in scope of the proposal for the City Planning Commission, City Council to incorporate. So I'm just going to throw out a multiplier of 2 existing today, and a district has a multiplier of 6. Board can't call for 7. The board can't call for 1, but there may be districts in between that sometimes can be adopted. So doing things within scope is important. But also leveraging land use improvements for other community improvements, calling, for example, perhaps like in the Gowanus rezoning, already we've seen movement of properties being individual landmarks because of community conversations. And in areas that are looking for rezoning, we've had conversations in Bushwick, Crown Heights, and Sunset Park at times for rezoning to expand the landmarking in those areas. and also Bed-Stuy as well. So making motions where districts should expand could make sense as well. We've had a lot of neighborhood rezonings in parts of Brooklyn over the last 15 years. And a lot of that was to reflect the built character, but there are still areas that haven't been rezoned. And parts of Bushwick, East New York, Brownsville, particularly East Flatbush, those are areas that have zoning that's 50, 60 years old. So there's been conversations towards advancing different zoning. So those are still things that could be considered by boards, where city planning would be an essential partner of moving things like that forward. And then also within the manufacturing areas, for example, CB8 is looking at an initiative in collaboration with city planning. It's called MPround, looking to take an area that's basically allowing one-story warehouses and creating housing and job-related development opportunities. So the Gowanus initiative I mentioned, Gowanus Neighborhood Plan, is in the process now. Boards 2 and 6 will be voting on that soon. So other quality of life things could be looked at, whether it's modifying parking regulations to allow more parking, less parking, as examples, advancing car sharing. These are all type of things considered. We've had some zoning text that mandates ground floor and community facility uses instead of not dictating what happens on the ground floor. That's resulted from blank walls. We've even had buildings lifted up like stilts on the ground floor. Community boards could think about corridors where we could advance more development opportunities to help our housing situation, where you could promote mandatory inclusionary housing. So I would consider that an appropriate thing for boards to look at areas and recommend them to government. So Winston mentioned the process before. So again, community boards have a maximum of 60 days, but when they submit, they're done. So if they submit early, the clock shortens. The borough president's clock is dependent on that. We get 30 days, commission 60 days, council up to 50 days. 197A plans were mentioned before. Again, that's another thing that can be considered. It's been adopted in a few parts of Brooklyn, Greenpoint and Williamsburg towards the waterfront, Red Hook and Sunset Park. Industrial area have such plans adopted. So again, these are things that boards may think about. And again, I mentioned the text changes for supermarkets, health and fitness, open streets on the near-term horizon for you. So assistants, mentioned before, both colleagues from city planning mentioned their agency is an important resource for many types of assistance. I'm also available. We can talk about BSA and landmark as well, even though it's things we don't personally weigh in on. I've worked with board committees, leadership, individual members, representatives of the community at large, business community, development community. We're here as a resource, so we can help you formulate your zoning knowledge and your recommendations as well. We're not looking to influence them, just give you technical support. And I can be reached. My email is rbarak. It should also be on the office website. My spelling is BEARAK. So rbarak at brooklynbp.nyc.gov. Office phone 718-802-4057. And I'm always happy to be of assistance. Thank you.
So thank you, Richard. So that was a jam-packed hour, a lot of information to take in. We're not expecting you to retain all this information, but we hope that this will guide you and navigate you as you serve as a member on your respective community board. We do note that we are recording this presentation. Some members did come in late. We'll make sure you get the recording. So if you want to do your swearing in via recording, you'll be able to. I don't think we ever really shared a recording before, but we'll make sure that you guys get access to this video. We do want to note that we ask all membership to take your appointment very seriously. Attendance is very important. We want to make sure that when you're appointed to the board, that you do attend your meetings, that you do try to participate. As you know, board members, there's select number of space on the community board. So we want to make sure that you're being productive members and you are engaged and attending the meetings, and that you basically are serving your community that you're seeking to represent. So it's a big responsibility, and we do hope that you guys do take it very seriously. And once again, use all of the resources here tonight to guide you as you serve your 2022-2023 term. So with that being said, you guys will get a copy of that charter that Tanya noted via email. If you have any questions, you could reach out to us. But once again, we do encourage everybody now to be proactive and reach out to your respective board if you haven't received notification. We won't have time, I guess we have up until 6:30. I know other people have meetings going on. So we could kind of conclude, but if I don't see any, we didn't put aside time for any kind of Q&A, but please check out the chat. And if you have any particular questions directed towards anyone, please feel free. Orientation, I hope. Okay, someone has a comment. Speaker slides. I do know that the slide, once again, this is recorded, so you'll have copies of the presentation, and Tanya will be sharing her slides too as well. So that should be helpful. Okay, that should be helpful. And we'll check with other presenters for their slides, but this will be able to view to have context and follow up. So you're welcome. So with that being said, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I'd like to thank Tanya Cantlow, Council to the Board President, Richard Barrett, Director of Land Use. We'd like to thank the Mayor's Office of Community Affairs, the Conflict of Interest Board, representatives from the Department of City Planning, and all of our panelists and Borough Hall family here for taking part. We want to be able to put faces to names, and you know who we are when you're reaching out to us via email. And don't be a stranger. We once again congratulate you on your membership. And with that being said, this concludes our program for this evening. So congratulations. Give yourself a round of applause. Yay. And we thank you for serving the wonderful borough of Brooklyn. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful evening.